President Trump is facing criticism for showing off tanks and weaponry during his July 4th celebration. The president honored the military and called for unity during his Independence Day speech yesterday.
Crowds gathered at the Lincoln Memorial to show their support, while others protested him and his administration by flying baby Trump balloons near the Capitol. For more on this, let's bring in Associated Press White House reporter Jill Colvin. Jill, thanks so much for being with us. All right, how did things go yesterday? It looked like it was going to rain on his parade, but the event went on. He spoke.
It did, yeah. I mean, the weather sort of held up. There was sort of drizzling throughout the day, probably kept a couple of people from showing up on the Mall, but nonetheless, the White House had been quite concerned about the possibility of not as many people showing up as the president would have liked, kind of a repeat of that inauguration where there were big swaths of the mall that were empty. Instead, it looks like they did get a pretty good turnout, and the president, as aides had hoped for, really wound up sticking to the script. He gave a pretty kind of standard for any other president overview of American history, lots of patriotism, lots of flag waving in there, and there was a lot of concern, especially from critics of the president, about the fact that he had sort of tried to make this celebration about himself, putting himself front and center on the stage here, but he kind of kept to the script and didn't go off on any hyper politicized tangents.
So, but even before yesterday, when we got word that there would be tanks and flyovers, Democrats and other critics started to sort of push back. Initially, I thought, okay, tanks on display, what's the big deal? Can you sort of explain why the idea of putting tanks on display ruffled people's feathers?
Yeah, it was just such an unusual thing, as you were driving around the city yesterday, just to stumble upon tanks, positioned around various landmarks across Washington, D.C. It's something that we don't typically see. There were concerns from local D.C. leaders. The streets of the city were obviously not designed to sustain the weight of that kind of military machinery. And so they'll be examining today whether those tanks caused any kind of damage to the streets. They'll be interested in billing the White House for any kind of damage. But this also plays into bigger concerns about the president. He's somebody who obviously is very, keen on the military, tries to talk it up all the time, investing more money in the military. But he's also somebody who has shown a pattern of being, close to and seems to really revere more authoritarian leaders. You saw him on the world stage when he was in Japan just last week. And instead of spending time with Theresa May or Justin Trudeau from Canada, America's typical allies, you see the president spending a lot of time with leaders from Saudi Arabia, being very close with Russia's Vladimir Putin, really, talking up these authoritarian leaders, joking about the kinds of powers that they have, joking that maybe he doesn't want to step down, after 8 years if he wins a second term. And so you have that reality, and then a president who chooses to display all of America's military might, and it just rubs people the wrong way.
Jill, speaking of Vladimir Putin, the president is getting slammed for a now deleted tweet calling Air Force One Aircraft One, as of course the Russian president's plane is often referred to. What has been the reaction to that, especially because government-run media yesterday in Russia, they were mocking this display of our military might, suggesting some of these tanks that had paint peeling off. I mean, they were mocking the president. So what are we to make of this now deleted tweet?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it could just be a typo. Something else he could have done is Air Force One is only technically Air Force One when the president is on board. Any plane becomes Air Force One when he is on it. And the president was not obviously in the air during the flyby yesterday. And so it's possible that he was trying to make a distinction in referencing the aircraft without him, physically being on it. But it's so interesting to watch the dynamic between, the Russian public. And you see these displays quite often of them making fun of the president, trying to undersell America's military might, in this kind of back and forth between the two countries that happens even as the two leaders really try to make nice on the public stage and do everything they can to complement each other.
All right, I want to switch gears a little bit. Former Vice President Joe Biden was defending his record on racial issues. He spoke to CNN earlier about the controversy between him and fellow 2020 candidate Kamala Harris. You remember the debate. Let's hear a little bit of what he had to say.
I was in favor of busing that was de jure busing. That is, if a court ruled that there was a law passed or circumstance that a county, a city, a state did that prevented black folks from being somewhere, then that's wrong. You should bus. Busing did not work. You had overwhelming response from the African American community in my state. In fact,
Why didn't you fight it like this in the debate?
in 30 seconds?
Hey,
Come
what
on, man.
happens?
What I didn't want to do is get in that scrum. Do you think the American public looked at that debate, take me out of it, and thought, boy, I really like the way that's being conducted. They're really showing themselves to do really well. Come on, man.
So he sort of reiterated what he did say on the stage, actually, sort of clarifying his position. But one of the things that I found very interesting about this interview is he spent a lot of time saying, well, Kamala knows me. It's almost like he took that attack personally.
Yeah, come on, man.
Right, exactly. So I want to ask you, what do you take of it? What do you make of his counter argument that essentially is anyone who knows me knows what I stand for?
Yeah, that's an argument that's really not going to fly. There are going to be many more of these debates, and he really can't play the, I know these people were friends off stage kind of card, expecting not as the, presumptive front runner to be, the subject of any attacks. But what I think is even more interesting here is the fact that this many days after the debate, the Vice President Biden, former Vice President Biden, is still out there trying to defend himself, trying to explain what he meant in that, very stunning moment between the two of them that has had such a significant impact on the polls ever since that debate. The vice president needs to understand that, that's how debates work. You get, a minute, you get a minute and 30 seconds, and you need to figure out a way to make your point in that length of time. He's somebody who's participated in many debates over the course of his career, and it's sort of stunning that he is now, seemingly not able to handle that format and complaining about the format. That's the way these are going to work, and I imagine that members of his team are going to be spending a lot of time preparing for the next debates, trying to figure out how to, deliver those kinds of concise answers that you need to if you're going to be competitive on those stages.
Absolutely. You got to be prepared to get in that scrum. Can't be afraid of the scrum. All right, Jill Colvin, thank you so much.
Thank you.